Welcome to the Pacific Wealth Podcast, where we cut through the noise in finance, give you the clarity you need to make smart money decisions.
Now, just a quick disclaimer. The information discussed on this podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not intended as financial, investment, or legal advice. Please do your own research and consult a financial advisor or other qualified professional to assess your individual situation before making any financial decisions.
I'm Matt Ganny here with Stephen Cove, Head of Financial Planning at Pacific Wealth Partners, and today we're talking about something that most Australians barely think about until it's too late: superannuation. So we're going to share some of the hidden gaps, some of the stuff that no one really tells you about, and delve into, I guess, a few deeper levels that what people can do, and maybe even a couple checks of what people can do this month as well. So I guess let's get into it.
Shall we?
I guess there's something that most Australians don't really realise, which is the fact that throughout their working life, most Australians will averagely lose $50,000 to $100,000 in their super fund throughout their entire life, which is quite a fascinating fact. And the thing is, that doesn't really come down to the markets dropping. That comes down to things that have been missed out. And I guess the reality is, superannuation is not something that we're taught about. We're not educated in school. We don't know about this stuff. So I guess that's why it does get left behind more than anything. Do you know any sort of the reasons why this probably would happen, Steve?
Yeah, no, it's a great statistic and a good question to unpack. So we see a lot of the time that people may be missing out, or it's sort of the opportunity cost there of their superannuation not maybe building up enough as they're getting sort of closer to retirement. And it could be a range of a few things there, but most commonly what we would probably expect is the fact that maybe people aren't invested appropriately within their super, and that means that they may be missing out on some returns, especially when they're younger as well. So what will happen is a lot of super funds will just set you up with a default investment option. So that's for someone that's starting out their working life, or maybe approaching retirement, or even in retirement. They may be in the same investment as basically everyone, a one-size-fits-all type structure there. Now, the drawbacks there is that when you're younger, you may not be taking on enough growth assets to build up the super balance. And so that could mean that you're missing out. And then that could also lead to potentially making or needing to make take on more of those growth assets as you get closer to or even in retirement, because you haven't built up enough of a balance. So there is that opportunity cost, we would say. And if that's costing around about $50,000 to $100,000 on average, you can clearly see over a, say, 20, 30-year time horizon that people are working, that has a big impact.
Well, I think it's the out of sight, out of mind situation. If something's not physical, you can't touch it. It's kind of forgotten about, because what's the age that people can access, or at least touch a portion of their super?
Yeah, 60.
60, yeah. So, someone who has their first job, whether they're in their mid-teens or when they finish uni and they're in their early 20s, and that's when maybe they get the super set up. I mean, what is that? 40-odd years away until they can even access it. So, like most, I guess, when you're younger, it goes in, gets set up by your employer. You don't really do too much about it, and then it's kind of just left behind. And I guess the irony is the fact that if people could look at it a little bit younger, it would make a massive difference. But because it's not tangible, people don't. So when some people get put in their super fund with an employer, they get put it on like a default investment option. So you can explain a little bit more about that, Steve.
Yeah, it's a good... so basically, the default investment option is the superannuation's fund of saying that, we don't know the member, we don't know all their personal details, their tolerance towards risk, their goals and objectives. So we're just going to come up with a investment that we try to find a bit of a broad base, audience for in terms of their members, to say, okay, well, that's why if you're sort of starting out or you're sort of entering into retirement, it's kind of somewhere that fits in the middle of that. So balanced, as I'm sure many people have heard, balanced is a very common option for people to be invested in within their superannuation. And what that effectively means is you'd probably have around about based on an asset allocation, around about 70 to 80% of your superannuation invested in things like shares and property. So they're more growth assets, growth investments. Well, they'll go up and down a lot more in the short term, but over the long term, we would generally expect to see a greater return with those investments. And then around about 20 to 30% invested in cash and fixed interest, which we know is much more stable, but not going to provide as much growth in the long term. So what the super fund is aiming to do there is just saying, okay, well, we're trying to cater for everyone here, but where people are obviously missing out and where, I guess, people can sort of look to be a little bit more focused on what's important to them is to understand that, yeah, there may be one option that they stick with, but there could be quite a range of other options, and some might be much more beneficial or much more relevant to your life stage, your goals, and what you're aiming to do.
I think that's sort of probably one of the key, you could say almost issues in a way, is the fact that obviously a lot of the terminology that you've used is quite financial terminology. Growth assets, defensive assets, I guess cash, shares, fixed income, all that type of stuff, which I guess people have heard of these words, and or some people even obviously know a little bit about it. But as soon as I guess people look into their fund, maybe look at their statement that comes through in the post every 12 months, they look at these words, and it all just becomes a little bit almost confusing in a way. So I guess a lot of people potentially might just put that to the side, saying, I'll worry about that on a different day, a different year, and then nothing's ultimately ever done from that.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. It's put in the too hard basket, but unfortunately, you do sometimes pay the price of procrastination in that event. And if you're in that position where you're unsure about things, it's always best to then go and see if there is someone that can help either explain things to you clearly and so that you can make sense of it. Because every year that you do leave it, for many people, they're just checking their statement when it either gets mailed out to them or sent to them via email. And that's about it. They'll check their balance. Oh, yep, that might have gone up. Happy days. Can't remember what it was last year. But yeah, the more you leave that, the greater the effect will be, and the more opportunity you've lost as a result. So the sooner you do something about it, the better.
Yep, absolutely. Now, the majority of, I guess, individuals are put in, your super funds like your industry funds, and that's pretty much what many people do. Now, I believe it's roughly about 100 government-regulated APRA super funds in Australia at this point, and that's a combination of, your industry, your retail, your advisor-only products, and then obviously you've got some government ones as well, whether in the military or defined benefits, et cetera, et cetera. Now, sort of taking it back to, what most people are put into are your industry funds. Now, these industry funds, they generally have, talking about the investments again, 10 to 12 investment options inside of there. And I guess with a lot of the investment options we see, they're balanced, growth, high growth, etc. You were sort of going down the track, which is the reason when people are missing out on in their actual investments inside their super itself. I'll let you go on this. Yeah, no, it's a good question. So, yeah, basically it's, what am I invested in first and foremost is the first question, and sort of like what are my goals and objectives? What can I do with my existing superannuation as well? So investments is a key part because that's going to be the bulk of where your superannuation, or that's where your superannuation is doing the heavy lifting. We've heard the term, make your super or make your investments work harder for you. That's really about how much it's growing on its own accord. Part of super is also contributions into the fund, but we'll focus on the investments first. And, we'll take the example of someone, because we've addressed it, starting off and they're wanting to grow their super. They've got, say, 20 plus years or even longer, 30 years or so of their working life ahead of them. So we would naturally assume that they're willing to accept, more risk with their investments and take on more of a growth approach because they can, reap the rewards of that over the long term there. So your first point of call is, first of all, understanding what it is that you're invested in.
and how that's sort of allocated, as I mentioned, with those growth and defensive assets, and then looking to see if there's other options that may be, a little bit more geared towards your growth approach, if that's what you're wanting to do. Of course, if you're wanting to be a little bit more secure with the investments, or if you have a particular preference in terms of how you want your funds to be invested, a lot of people are making decisions now about, where their money's going in terms of if it's a, ethical or sustainable type investment. There's those options as well. So looking to see, what available options meet those criteria is really important. And then, as you mentioned, there are a lot of super funds out there. So if your particular super fund, doesn't meet that, or you feel that there's another fund that might be a little bit better towards that, whether that's a greater range of investment options or a particular type of investment that they go into, then that's certainly worth exploring as well.
And an interesting thing as well about, I guess, talking about sort of industry funds is that people generally get their super fund when they go with a particular company, or a particular industry, I should say. So if someone's in the hospitality industry, they're going to generally get Host Plus. If you go in the medical industry, you're probably going to get Hester. If you're in the construction, you're probably going to get CBUS. And, sort of the list goes on. And I guess from speaking to a lot of people over the years who have super, one big question that they do ask me a lot is, I'm with my super fund. I work in the medical industry right now, and I'm with Hester as an example. Are they going to be doing a good job for me based on the fact that, I work in the medical field? And I thought I'd, ask you the question. You might have some good insight into what a lot of people are sort of ultimately asking me that about.
Yeah. It's a great question to consider, because effectively what an industry fund is tailored for that industry. So it does get a little bit more specific, but it doesn't get to the point where it's, looking at the individual level as well. And so every individual is obviously different. So, you may be a nurse, for example, with Hester, and, you may be more akin to your goals and objectives as someone that's working in construction, and is a similar age bracket or something like that. So it doesn't mean that here's the industry that I work in and here's the fund that's best for me. There can be some advantages to industry funds, and traditionally it's when a insurer, let's say you're working in a blue-collar CBUS type, a CBUS super fund, where you've got an insurer that will understand that most of their members are working blue-collar and sometimes hazardous jobs, and so they tailor the insurance for that. But then, the same philosophy is applying there, where it's just here's the insurance and here's what you get given when you open up the fund. There hasn't been much tailoring. There hasn't been much of the personalisation to it. So again, you apply that. I know that we're talking about super here, but you apply it in the same philosophy and say, okay, well, I've really got to understand, what's important to me. Here's some options around what the superannuation can do. Here's some options around what insurances that I've got available to me. And for each individual, it's going to be different. We're all going to have different circumstances. We may have, family commitments. We may have debt commitments. We may have our goals that may not align with what the majority of the people in our industry have as well. So in that case, it doesn't make sense for everyone to have the same super fund or the same insurances. It makes sense for everyone to have what's right for them. And so, that's what I would encourage people to do, is at least look and understand, and then, put some consideration to what it is that might be, what they may need to make sure that they're in the right super fund, the right investment option, the right insurance cover.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people don't even know, and it's not anyone's fault at all, but they don't really know that they even have insurances in their super. From a lot of feedback that I hear from, clients on the phone or potential clients as well, they, a lot sort of say, I didn't even know I had that in place. And I guess like you said, that the insurance they get, very standardized across the board with everybody, but obviously everyone's situation is different. If you've got, I don't know, let's say someone who's in their mid-30s and they've got a mortgage and they've got kids, and they've got the same amount of coverage as someone who is, let's say, in their early 20s with no mortgage and no kids, or even going to the opposite end of the scale where they're getting close to retirement, their kids are already grown up and they've paid off most of their mortgage, yet they all have almost the same type of insurance coverage.
Yep.
So I guess that's sort of one of the, not so much downfall, but, that's where I guess it's not tailored to an individual, and then that's where, things could potentially go wrong if people need to make a claim at any point in time.
Oh, definitely.
So what are the things, I guess, that you can do with the insurance is that you can tailor it to people a lot better?
Yeah, great. So there's a few different types of insurances, and it all comes down to, what your circumstances are and how much cover you need and how you want to fund the cover and, what cover you can afford. And there's so many different variables that come with that. So if you've got someone that's got a young family, they're the sole income earner of the household, their reason for cover is going to be quite high, because if, say, for example, they experience a life event where they pass away, or they can't work again, or they diagnosed with a serious medical condition, then that's going to put a massive hindrance on the family and maybe children and their ability to continue to meet their ongoing debt commitments, and put a lot of financial stress on people, especially at a time where that's probably the last thing you want to be worrying about is if you're going through a claim, you're wanting to get the resources that you need in order to either get better if you can, or provide for your family and not have to worry about the financial stress that comes along with it.
Absolutely.
So I guess just looking at, again, your circumstances, we always would say understanding what it means to have cover. We need to first of all put a purpose to anything that we do, because then that helps to derive meaning from that. So, understanding what your options are and understanding what you may, what would happen if I wasn't here anymore. What sort of financial pressure does that put on my family, and what would help alleviate that? It's kind of working through those examples to understand what what your options and what your requirements are.
It's always a balancing act, isn't it? Insurances, because it's one of those things that you hope you never use, but one of those things that you kind of want in place if something ultimately does happen. And I guess probably cost is quite a big thing that people have to bear in mind when they're getting insurance, because again, from my understanding, is the fact that the older you are, or the riskier your job is, or potentially some sort of medical condition, that can have a massive effect on the cost of your insurance. And then I guess as an advisor, would you say it's sort of that balancing act? Yeah,
100%. And this is where everyone's going to be different and individual again. Because, someone may say, look, I'm really healthy. I don't feel like anything's going to happen to me. And so their desire for cover, or having maybe as much cover as they should, isn't really there because they haven't either experienced anything problematic, or they may not have had someone close to them as well that has had to experience a claim or go through a process where they needed insurance. So there's always going to be a balancing act between, we want to make sure that what cover you're paying for is one, affordable and not imposing too much on your other objectives, whether that be from a cash flow point of view, or if you're funding insurance premiums through superannuation, your growth aspirations with super, and then also the cost of the policy, and then also the value that it would provide in the event that you did actually need to make a claim. Because no one actually wants to make a claim. That's not what we want to do. But it's something that you're really, really glad that you sorted and you got in force. If you ever did need to claim on that, it's it is something that does change lives. Putting some consideration at least into what your options and what your requirements may be is really quite important.
And obviously we're delving down the path of insurance, and people may be listening now, how come, obviously you mentioned you were talking about superannuation at the beginning, and now we're sort of delving down the line of insurance, but obviously insurance is quite a massive component of the actual superannuation itself on there. Yep. And I guess for those sort of listening and watching, and they might not have an understanding in that field, what are your three insurances that you can get with inside the super fund, which is your life, your TPD, which is your total permanent disability, and then you've got your income protection cover? as well, right?
Yep, that's correct. So yeah, three insurance options as you mentioned there. Life, it will pay out in the event that you pass away or diagnosed with a terminal illness, generally given 12 to 24 months to live. Total and permanent disablement cover, that's if you're unable or unlikely to ever return to work again. And then income protection to replace your income for a period of time on a monthly basis. There's also another cover called trauma cover. That one doesn't fit inside superannuation, needs to be paid for outside of super, but that's for the event of being diagnosed with a medical condition. And I'll talk about something that might be a little bit of a hot topic, controversial here. So you've hit the nail on the head there. We've started talking about super. Now we're talking about insurance. What's the jump? What's the link there? The link is generally when you're given a super fund from your employer. You start with, here's the fund that you're paying your contributions into. They'll at some point kick in some at least life and total and permanent disablement cover. And for many people, if they've been working over a range of years and they've done a range of different jobs, they may have multiple super funds. They may have different insurance covers within their superannuation. There's a book that many people are familiar with that was written a while ago called The Barefoot Investor.
Yep. And
what the author had recommended was move everything into a low-cost, indexed investment option, and with Host Plus, we'll say, and with that, there was no real consideration around the insurance component. So if people did have multiple funds and they did have multiple insurance policies and they decided to consolidate and move it into one fund, and then there's no insurance, or the insurance that they have is significantly less, or it's nowhere near how much cover that they require, then that could be more impactful to their circumstances as a result than increasing or saving a little bit of money on the superannuation investment. So, yeah, we would always caution people if there are, if they do have something they're listening, they have their super and they have insurances within that super. You need to pay consideration to those insurances. You would always replace your insurance cover first with something that's going to be appropriate before cancelling the existing cover. So that's something that we can't just talk about one without the other because of how they're intertwined and the potential consequence of doing something that may not be the best thing and what impact that can have on people if they ever required the insurance cover.
Yeah, definitely. And look, it's we're not sort of saying, I guess, the default cover that you get inside of a regular super fund is necessarily a bad or a negative thing. There was quite an interesting obviously sad story, but an interesting one in this sort of sense, whereby I actually got told it by a colleague and a staff member at Pacific Wealth Partners. And he had, because he's been working as a research analyst and has quite an understanding into a lot of elements to do with the insurance at super on that sort of level, he was having a chat to one of his very, very good friends. And one of his very good friends, he's in his late 30s and unfortunately had quite a sort of severe illness where I think it was a form of leukemia. And that ultimately started to sort of, I guess, disintegrate some bone, I think it was, around the ribs. I don't know, I'm not sort of a doctor or a scientist or anything, but this is sort of what happened with his case. Had to have a surgery, then another surgery, and then after basically having that second surgery, he got told by the doctors that you're not allowed to work again. Now, he's a plumber, so he basically said you can never plumb again in your entire life. So for someone like that, you're in your late 30s, you've had this thing happen to you. Now, he actually got told by, the research analyst who works at Pacific Wealth Partners, he went to him and said, look, you should check your super fund. See if you've got a TPD cover inside of there, the total permanent disability cover, and just see what you can do. Now, he ended up having a look. He checked it. He did have cover, luckily, which is great. It was $156,000 of cover. Now, for this particular gentleman that went through all this, he was quite almost lucky enough, or worked very well and worked very hard, that he had paid off his mortgage already. So that was a really, really powerful thing. He now figures out he's got $156,000 as well, which is fantastic. He wouldn't have had that if he didn't sort of know about it, which is excellent. And that's, I guess, the sort of, almost the sort of the saddening aspect is that's great, but is 156,000 now enough to live the rest of your life with if you've been told by doctors that you've been permanently disabled at the end of the day? And I guess that's what comes down to having it more tailored, having it more personalised to your situation, where they might look at how many kids you've got, how many years you've got left in the workforce, and you might even have a higher amount than that. So it's like a bittersweet, I guess, that situation.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a sad story, but it's not uncommon. Where we've seen that, and that's happened in the past as well with people that I've spoken to and provided advice for, where they've come to see me and they've got a TPD claim. It's unfortunate because you wish you could go back and say, maybe have a look into what would happen, in these circumstances, and would that be enough? Because, as you said, 156,000 if someone's in their 30s, and fortunately they made some smart decisions, as you said, in terms of paying off their mortgage. But I would imagine that in terms of replacing the income that he would have been bringing into the household, that 156,000 is probably not going to last too long.
Not in today's day and age.
No, that's right. And so it's about understanding, broadening the scope, and then you've made an informed decision either way about what it is that you're wanting to do. And I would certainly encourage people to look into things and go, okay, well, what does, let's go through some scenarios here. Although it's not fun, it's not like you're going to be sitting down on a Saturday night, going through these scenarios, but it's like, it's important conversations to have, because at the end of the day, you'd rather be having them, much earlier than them happening, than having the discussion, after an event's happened that, you actually need the cover. So, not an uncommon story, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know. And I guess one of the most important sort of takeaways from that, in a way, is it's never too young. You're never too young to look at something, So I guess we'd always encourage people to just look at things early. I know it sounds almost sounds like a bore, like I can't touch this money till I'm 60. What do I need to look at it when I'm younger? But in reality, if you just do it, put the time in, put the effort in, get a review done by your current fund, get a review done with an advisor, get a review done by someone out there that has some sort of, I guess, ability that they can give some sort of general or personal advice, then it's going to be a massive difference to, I guess, what the end result is going to be.
100%. And for us, we always say, you don't have to go making massive changes. It doesn't have to be, I've got $100,000 now, I can invest that or put it into super. Or it's not like that. It's small changes over a long period of time make a big difference. And so making some minor tweaks here and there, it may be something like changing an investment. It may be just adding a little bit in each week or fortnight, whatever can be afforded to. If you do that over a 20, 30 plus year period, you'll notice a pretty big change at the end of the day, and you'll be much better off for it as a result. As I said, like even if it is 30 years before you can access super, you imagine all that time that it's sitting there, building up, slightly better, and you're adding a little bit more into it. That's going to compound significantly.
Yeah, the old compound interest effect.
Yeah.
Going back to the actual investment options in the super fund, I think most super funds, I believe, you can probably confirm with me on this one, they actually do offer like 2 free financial advisory sessions a year with what they do. But I guess what are sort of the limitations with this?
Yeah. Some super funds will certainly offer a in-house financial planner. They may be limited to only speaking about what options they've got available on their superannuation fund, and it may be just more like going through what we call a risk profile questionnaire and finding what may be a more appropriate investment option, which can be, as we've discussed, quite significantly beneficial. Plus also maybe just, talking about, the different types of contributions and how you can build the superannuation. But they may be limited in terms of just offering advice or guidance on that particular super fund. They may not look to other super fund options as well. The expectation there is that you may be you may be focusing on one particular fund that may not have the optimal solution for you, and it may be beneficial to look elsewhere, or it may be that fund is the best and you need to cancel out the other ones and just say, okay, this is the best fund for me.
And we're going to pause the conversation here and pick it up again in part 2. So I hope you've enjoyed our discussion and picking up on some useful tips to better understand your super. We'll see you on the next episode in part 2 of the Pacific Wealth podcast with myself, Matt Genny, and Stephen Cove.